All right, so let me explain what's going on here. I have an entryway here in my house that was covered with a laminate flooring, and I wanted to get rid of the laminate flooring and put tile down. So laminate floor is pretty easy to rip up, and what laminate is it's usually, it looks like wood, and it's in little strips and it locks together. So if you have a flooring that you're ripping up and you don't know if it's laminate or not, I mean, it's not a big deal, but that's what laminate flooring is. It's kind of like fake hardwood floor, and it's not glued down, it's just a floating floor. So the floor just sits on top of either your subfloor, or in my case, when I ripped up that laminate floor, it had a whole vinyl flooring underneath it. And vinyl flooring is a whole different story. And the actual flooring, I can show you what it looked like underneath, is it looked like this. So it was this stuff. It was just a big sheet of this. And that's a vinyl flooring, and it's pretty old. And a lot of times when people put down new flooring, they'll just go over top of the old flooring, which was no good for me because I wanted to put tile down. So I had to put it down on the plywood here. So I had to get that vinyl flooring up. And so it's a bit of a nightmare to get that stuff up. And what happens is you pull up the vinyl flooring, the top coat, and then what you're left with is you're left with all of the adhesive. So think of like a sticker. If you put a sticker on something and you try to peel it off, and it just kind of rips the top layer of the sticker off and leaves like the white backing and the adhesive. Well, that's what happens here. You pull up that vinyl and then you're just left with this stuff. And I really didn't find a lot of help anywhere online as to how to get it up. It's kind of a hard, really pain in the butt thing to do. So I figured that I would kind of show you guys how I did this. Because it's really not fun, and it's kind of disheartening when you go to start pulling up that vinyl sheeting, and it's just a nightmare. So the tools you need are really minimal. You need like a bucket of water and a sponge or a cloth. You need a little scraper, a little utility knife, and an iron. Now I had some bonus tools here. I have a heat gun, and I have one of these little oscillating tools, which this has like a scraper blade on it. And you turn this on and it just shakes that scraper. And it's nice, but it's not necessary. I used it for some of the really hard parts. Some place where the glue was like really cured onto the plywood and it was hard to get that off. But it's not necessary. Same thing with the heat gun, it's not necessary. What you really need is you need the iron and you need the little scraper. So what a lot of people would say to do is for the laminate floor, or at least this stuff, the leftover stuff, cut it into squares. But I found that was kind of really pointless to cut it into squares, because then you're just working with these little squares and it's a lot of cutting. So what I did is I ran really long cuts, like strips. So I did like the length of the room here, long ways. And I already have part of this stuff up. This is what's left. But what I did is I took my knife and I went every, I don't know, foot or so. So you can see the cut here. And so all I did is I just ran my knife and I just did long strips. That's the length of the room and in the closet here. So I ran those in long strips. Okay, so here's the key, is that you're gonna turn your iron on. And I did my iron, it's like halfway. It goes up to 6, I have it on 4. Because you don't want it too hot. It can't be too cold either though. So I put it halfway on. Just turn it on, let it sit, let it heat up. And then I'll work a strip at a time here. And I was actually working 2 strips at a time, but I'll just show you 1 strip at a time here. So you can see where my cut mark is right here. It's not perfectly straight or anything, but it's just a nice big cut. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my sponge, and this is the key, is that you gotta get these strips wet, and they have to be pretty wet. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get a lot of water on these, and you can see I'm gonna saturate them pretty good. And you can see how much water I'm putting down here. Like, you can see my wet strip opposed to the dry one. So I'm gonna get that really wet. And what I'll actually do is I'll wet this whole strip, because what it's gonna do is it's gonna give that water time to really soak in to this backing here. And sometimes what happens is, as you're working, you actually have to go back and wet it again. But I mean, you can see how wet it is. There's like even puddles of water here. This stuff will not come up dry. It has to be wet. If you try to peel this stuff up dry, you'll have no luck. And it's just kind of a nightmare. So you can see how wet that strip is. If I look up here, you can see this is my wet strip. Those are the dry ones. But so you want it pretty wet. All right. So then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my iron, and hey, look, you will ruin your iron doing this. This was a nice clean iron when I started, so I'll have to get a new one because it gets pretty covered in adhesive. So you will ruin this, but it is worth the headache. And all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start at the end here, and I already removed some, so if you didn't, then you'll just start at like the end of the room. And all I'm gonna do is there's the end, and I'm just gonna set this there, and I'm gonna let it sit there for about a minute or so. And what that's doing is it's melting that adhesive. Now, the thing here is the timing and the heat. If you leave this on here too long, what it actually ends up doing is it dries the paper, and then it just kind of re-cures the adhesive, and then so it just, doesn't do anything. So what you want is you want to just heat it to the point where the adhesive loses its stick, but so that the paper is still wet. And then I'll do that. I'll leave it on there for a minute or so just to heat that up. And the paper doesn't seem dry yet. It looks like it's okay. And then what I do is I'll just slide it over, and then I'll work on that part that I just got. So what I'll do is right where my cut is, you can see that, I'll slide my knife underneath it, and I will just push my putty knife up underneath that stuff, just like that. And then you can see it just starts to come up. Now, it's not gonna be perfect. This isn't pretty. Even with this trick, it's still not a fun job, and it takes a while, but it does make it a lot easier. So then I did that, and I'll just slide then the iron over to the next spot. And as the iron's heating up the next spot, I'll just start peeling up the spot that it was on. And you can see it'll leave a little bit of stuff behind, but this stuff isn't too big of a deal. As long as we're getting all this paper and stuff off, that's the real killer. And then again, see that, I'll just slide this over, and then I have this heated spot, and same thing, I'll just dig in here and then start scraping that stuff up. And this is the best way that I found to do this. I wish someone had shown me this. I experimented with a lot of different techniques, and had a lot of aggravation doing this, but this seems to have been the best way to do this. If you have a heat gun, that helps too. Sometimes you can even hit, if you have really tough areas, you can use the heat gun and blast that for a little bit, and that helps. But again, you never want to fully dry out that paper. Otherwise, it's just impossible to get up. Then you just have to re-wet it again. And sometimes it helps if you go back in and wet it a second time. If this backing is really thick, Sometimes it takes that extra water to really penetrate into it and get it really wet so that you can heat it up and scrape it off. So hopefully this is helpful to anyone that has stumbled upon a nightmare such as this, because it certainly can be a nightmare and it is very disheartening, especially if you're trying to adhere to a schedule. So hopefully this is helpful, and hey, good luck.